Hey, it's Tony Robbins. Welcome to the podcast today. Listen, so many people talk about in business building a culture, but when companies are small, very often this is the last thing you think about. And I really believe that if you're going to build something that's going to be lasting, if you're going to become a business owner and not a business operator, which is the trap that most small businesses find themselves in, and even medium-sized businesses will go there, then I think if you're going to do that, you have to decide that you're going to build something where you don't need to be there for it to really grow. And to do that, it's got to be based on a culture that's going to cause the company to grow. One of my favorite companies out there is Zappos, and Tony Shea is a dear, dear friend of mine. And, he took a company, if you can imagine, that sounded like an idiotic idea. We're going to sell, originally, women's shoes on the internet. Well, what's wrong with that? Everybody and their brother would say, there's no way on earth this could ever happen. It's not going to happen. Why? Because they got to try the shoes on. It's never going to work. But he did two brilliant things. He came up with an offer, an irresistible offer, which, by the way, you want to change your company, change your offer. And just tell you right now, change your offer, change your life, change your company. And the offer was, we're going to offer to send them as many shoes as they want. We'll pay all the shipping, and if they don't like them, we'll pay to ship it back. Could have bankrupted the company, except he understood something most people didn't understand, which is women equate shoes with happiness. And even if they don't fit perfectly, they think they will in the future, and they'll squeeze into those babies. Ladies listening know what I'm talking about, right? And so I'm getting this not from men telling me this, but from women telling me this. The bottom line is that offer made for an amazing potential company. But the company, Tony will tell you, would never become what it became if they'd not started out from the very first day saying, we have to decide, what do we stand for? How are we going to operate? What are the rules of the game? What is our culture? Because in the end, the purpose of a business is to create raving fans. And if you're really going to build a business beyond yourself into something and grow and scale and bring true financial freedom to you and have an impact on the world, you better know what the culture is that's going to have that impact. And you got to be able to create something larger than yourself. And culture is the way to do that. Culture is king. So in order to help you do that, to give you an idea, Tony Shea sat down with his team and they came up with, these were the elements of their culture. Everybody's got to be obsessed with delivering wow through service. They are a service-based company. Their offers wouldn't matter at all, except when people call, they know everything about them. There is a level of communication and connection and caring that is like very few companies you're ever going to meet, because Zappos isn't the cheapest product. They're not Amazon in terms of their price points, but they are the best in meeting customers' needs. That's what they decided the culture would be from the very beginning. You had additional pieces like embrace and drive change. If you don't do that, you can't work here. If you do that, you're going to thrive. Create fun and a little weirdness. And if you've ever been to Zappos, if you haven't had a chance, it's worth, when you go to Vegas, taking a tour. They'll take you on a tour of the company, and you'll see it's kind of like going to an Unleash the Power Within event if you've ever been there. It's crazy and outrageous, and it brings a level of energy that then is infectious to everyone in the company, and it reaches out and touches the clients as well. Build a family spirit and be humble are just a few of the things that they built. So in order to help you with this and really establish the core values and create the kind of practice that I think will support you, I've asked Anna York to interview entrepreneur, author, and the founder of Successful Culture. And her name is Marissa Levin, and I think you're going to find that she really has made it in something simple, something that you can begin to apply right now to start moving yourself from the individual trying to make all the decisions to building a culture where people know what's right. In my companies in the early days, people would say, what does Tony think? Now they don't say that. They ask, what is right? And since they know what we stand for in each of those companies, that's why our companies have grown from the little things that we're doing $50 and $100 million to now over $5 billion a year. Culture is king. This is your podcast. Get your notes ready. Listen to, and more importantly than just listen, I'm going to tell you that, make sure afterwards you take some action so this gets implemented at whatever size organization you have. Here's Anna.
We hear a lot about company culture these days, and it's easy to get caught up with the idea that a good company culture means free yoga classes or gourmet lunches. But the truth is, the quality of a company's culture is ultimately determined by what the company stands for and how it treats its employees and others. Today, companies are finding that culture is not something nice to have, but something they must have. Statistics show that a company's culture has a direct impact on employee turnover, which affects productivity and therefore success. A Columbia University study shows that the likelihood of job turnover at an organization with high company culture is a mere 13.9%, while the probability of job turnover in low company cultures is a staggering 48.4%. Because unhappy employees don't tend to do more than the minimum. Great workers who don't feel appreciated quit, and poor managers negatively affect workers and productivity. Whereas loyal, passionate employees bring a company as much benefit as loyal, passionate customers by working harder, staying longer, bringing more creativity, and pushing the envelope to go that extra mile at every chance. They feel like they are a part of something, and their work brings them meaning. So, to help us learn more about what it takes to create a good company culture, we have Marissa Levin, entrepreneur, author, and CEO of Information Experts, one of the nation's most successful strategic communications, marketing, education, and human capital firms, and the CEO of Successful Culture, an organization dedicated to helping leaders build extraordinary cultures. Marissa, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here.
So, in your book, My Company Rocks: 8 Secrets to a Growth Driven Culture That Keeps Employees Happy and Engaged, you maintain that culture is a company's greatest competitive weapon. Can you speak a little bit more about this? Why is company culture so critical now?
Well, company culture is always critical. The thing about company culture is that every company has a culture, whether it is intentional or whether or not it's by default. Now, the smartest companies and the companies that want to hang on to their top talent and recruit their top talent, they will be intentional with their culture and they will set the culture from the corporate values. It's the corporate values that are determined by the executive team, by the founder, by the supporting executives that actually drive the organizational culture. So, if a company says that they're committed to work-life balance or work-life integration, that would be reflected in the core values, and then those core values are cascaded down throughout the organization, and every decision that is made within a company is actually driven by the core value system. So core values are what shape the organizational culture, and the culture is a company's DNA. It's the fingerprint of every company.
Yeah. So, do you have any recommendations on how a company that either is just starting out or who is taking a very conscious look at their culture, where do the core values come from?
They come from usually the heart and the mind of the founder. So, what is the passion behind the company? What's driving the company? When I launched Information Experts 20 years ago, the first thing that I did was I set a core value system. And it was about organizational quality in terms of the products and services we put out. It was quality of life. It was quality of people. It was quality of life inside and outside the organization. That was just one of our core values. But when you want to set your culture, that really is what you want to do. You want to set your core values first and foremost. And then following that will be the organizational mission. So, why you exist. And then the organizational vision in terms of where you are going. And those three elements combined, those will drive who you hire, what the products and services are that you provide and produce, who you partner with, who you work for, what the vibe in the office is. All of those three things, they're the things that drive everything else in a company.
So, how do you translate those core values and the mission and the vision into the company in very tactical ways? I mean, because I'm picturing, you have it on a poster and you can put it on a wall and you
Yeah.
can refer to it every once in a while. But what are the ways that you can really make that come alive within the company?
Well, it actually starts with the hiring. So when you're hiring, what I advise my clients through Successful Culture, because I coach so many CEOs through Successful Culture, is the first thing that we do is we look at their mission, their vision, and their values. And a lot of times they're living in a drawer, right? I mean, people do them, it's an exercise in futility, but they don't really live them. So we take them out and we say, what is the pain that you have in your company? If we go back to your core values, it probably is linked back to the fact that you're not living what's important to you. So let's re examine what you're living. And from this point forward, every decision that you're making in the company, hiring, firing, who you're working with, who you choose not to work with, will be driven by the core values. So every hire that you make, those core values have to be in the job description. And when you're interviewing potential employees, you want to say, here are our values. What inspired you to want to work for our company specifically? How do these values show up in your own life? Because you can't ask someone to come into your company and say, here, adopt these values. Values are something that are part of our own system. They're intrinsic to us. Your core value system may be very different than my core value system. So, how can I possibly ask you to come and work for me if I have a different value system? So, it really is all about getting it right during the hiring process and finding those people that are aligned with the core values from the very beginning.
It's interesting because we just came off of a Tony Robbins event called Date with Destiny, and one of the things that you do there is you do an exercise and a process that helps you as an individual identify your core values. Are you
Absolutely.
familiar with that one?
You know what? I'm not surprised that you do that. I mean, everything I love Tony and I love everything that he does in terms of the destiny and knowing who you are and driving from your center and all of that. It's just, everybody has their own core value system, right? So a lot of times people are looking for jobs. They're not looking for experiences. They're not looking for alignment of core values. And when I mentor young adults, when I mentor, recent college graduates or early entrepreneurs or other people going into the workforce, I always say, look at the core value system of the people running the company. So if you've got someone out there who is saying that they are into work life balance or work life integration, but they're working 60, 70 hours a week and they're never with their families, there's a disconnect there. And the way people live their life outside of the organization is going to be reflected on how they treat the people inside the organization. We can't have multiple versions of core values. We can't be one person when we're at work and one person when we're not. So, really take a look at the executive leadership of a company if you're going to work with them, either as an employer or a partner, and know who you're dealing with because everything comes from the core value system. It drives the whole culture.
Oh. So you mentioned you're working with young people and trying to
I,
help them
I do.
identify where their place is. Um, One of the interesting things is that for the first time in history, millennials have become the largest generation in the workforce. So what sort of impact does this have on company culture? What are they looking for, and how do you attract the best talent?
I'm so glad you asked that. I actually just did research on that specific thing. And to put it in a frame of reference, I have a 15-year-old and an 18-year-old, right? So my older son is going to be entering the workforce within the next 5 to 6 years. And they recently did a study. I'll have to look at the source, but a study just came out and it was about Gen Z. It wasn't even just about the millennials, it was about the next generation and what they're going to be looking for in the workforce. Because CEOs, it isn't just about who you're going to be attracting and recruiting now, but how are you building your organization to attract and retain talent in the future? And the things about the millennials and the Gen Zs, there are a couple similarities. The first thing is that they are very mission driven, they're very meaning driven. They're not focused on money. In fact, the generation following the millennial generation, they grew up in somewhat of a recession. So they are fearful of debt. They are not embracing a lot of materialism. They're extremely pragmatic with money. They're not looking for large mortgages. They're not looking to take on a lot of loans. They're not looking for fancy cars. They're looking to have a much more meaningful, pragmatic existence. So, this is the generation that has gotten saddled with a lot of college debt, right? A lot of college loans. They want to go out into the world, they want to make a difference. They have also watched their parents work themselves to 60, 70 hours a week. And their parents' generation was the first generation that was really working with on demand technology 24/7, right? So we're the generation that can't put down our phone. We're constantly on email, we're constantly texting, we're constantly tethered to our work and to our office. And we haven't done a good job of figuring out that work life balance and work life integration when it comes to technology. The generations coming behind us, the millennials and the Gen Zs, the younger generations, they're going to have no part of that. They're going to look for work life integration, work life balance. They're going to look for meaning in their work, and they're not going to be driven by money. Those are going to be the main drivers, really, for the workforce of the future.
If millennials are mission driven and they're looking for meaning in their work, I imagine it would be very easy to attract them if you are a nonprofit or a foundation or in the social capital space, right, or a
Hmm.
benefit corporation. What do you do if you are a small business and you have a product in the manufacturing space, or you're in a non-sexy industry, right? How do you attract them to the space with less obvious perks?
Well, here's the thing. In the past, um, the philanthropy, right, and the goodwill and all of the social causes was separated from the business plan and the way that businesses were operating. Okay. In the future, and actually it's happening now, that's not going to be the case. Philanthropy, social good is going to be completely integrated into the way an organization runs. I had the opportunity to meet and hear Bert Jacobs, who is the founder and CEO of Life is Good. Well, people say, oh, the t-shirt company. Actually, the way they see it is it's a communications company. Okay. Life is Good raises millions and millions of dollars for kids through all sorts of efforts. They have fully integrated social good into their business model. And this is absolutely going to be the organizational and cultural trend, not just for large businesses, but for small businesses. I own two small businesses, and both businesses support an organization called Tiger Lily Foundation. It is a small nonprofit that is dedicated to providing breast cancer support for young women under the age of 40. And we may not be able to write millions of dollars of checks. We may not be able to have dozens of employees do a 5K to raise money. But you know what? We can support the galas, and we can support them on our websites, and we can help them with their boards of directors. There are things that even the smaller companies can do. But the social enterprise, the social good that a company can do is absolutely going to be integrated into the culture and will be essential for attracting and retaining top talent in the future.
Great. It comes back to the values too, right? Because
It
you
does.
as a founder, you support that organization because you value what it supports, and so your employees would probably understand that and also embody that as well,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
So, you mentioned you're a small business and you had the opportunity to sort of start from scratch and develop your culture from the very beginning. What about when you want to transform a company's culture that has been well indoctrinated? So
Hmm.
how do you help them evolve or help turn them around to be where they want to be?
So that's a great term that you just used, turnaround, because that is exactly what happens. And typically, these CEOs and the leaders that come to me through successful culture, they're not coming to me because everything's working well. They're coming to me because they're in pain. There is some type of injury within the company that has to be fixed. It has to be triaged, right? So my tagline is taking leaders from triage to transformation. When I go into a company, we've got to stop the bleeding somewhere because you're losing people, you're losing revenues, you're losing customers, you've got low morale. Something is broken in your company. And so it starts with triaging and saying, let's just stop what we're doing. I'm working with a pretty large company that's in the sporting industry, the sporting goods industry, and they want to keep piling technology on top of technology on top of technology to automate and streamline. And I finally said to them, there's just no more spending. We cannot put in any more solutions until we figure out what is wrong. And so we're going back to the drawing board, and we're actually looking to see job descriptions. Do you have the right people in the right seats? Do you have the right people on the bus? Are they in the right seats? What does the organization think about the leadership? What does the organization think about its own culture? And we actually have to go into the organization through assessments, through 360-degree assessments, through organizational culture assessments, to get a pulse check on what the employees think about the culture. Because I will tell you, 100% of the time when I've gone in to assess organizational cultures, there is a disconnect between what the leadership team thinks is happening and what the employees think is happening. So the first thing that you have to do to fix a culture, to reverse engineer it, is to get a pulse check on what the employees think, because their opinions are what matter the most.
So how do you measure that? How does a business owner measure the current state of employee engagement? 'Cause it doesn't seem like it's a black or white metrics
You
situation.
cre- well, you create a safe environment for them to provide feedback. So you create an anonymous environment through different surveys and assessments, and bringing in a third party like myself who is non threatening, who they can be extremely candid and honest with, even though it's anonymous. If they know that it's anonymous feedback, then you create that culture of two-way communication. And the smartest companies will be proactive with it. So I'll tell you at Information Experts, one of the things that we did instead of having our all hands meetings every quarter, we have what were known as town hall meetings. And what we would do prior to those is we would set up an anonymous form, an online survey to be able to extract information from the employees on what they wanted to talk about. So, what were the issues, the gripes, the challenges, the questions that they had? And we made sure that they knew that they were heard and we incorporated them into the town hall meetings. So, the first thing that you want to do to establish trust with your employees is to establish two-way transparent communication, and you have to be just very proactive with it.
So, what is the impact of putting into place processes like your town hall meetings? Do you find that it impacts their productivity, and is that measurable? And just the general value? What's basically the next step to understand that what you're doing is working?
Doing the pulse checks, always checking in and doing a temperature read with the employees to see how they're feeling. Getting back to really the old adage of MBWI or MBWA, which is management by walking around. MBWA, management by walking around. And especially with technology today, I think it's so easy to just hide behind sending texts or, hide behind sending emails. There's something to be said about being face to face with your employees, and something to be said by, just actually having one on one real conversations with them instead of doing it through technology. It's really important to keep the human element in companies. And for this interview, I actually printed out some statistics about employee engagement or employee disengagement. And in one of the more recent surveys about employee engagement, only 20% of senior managers, these are the people that manage other people, are passionate about their work. Only 20% of senior managers surveyed in a national survey are passionate about their work. So when you have a leader or a manager that isn't passionate about their work, that's going to lead to bad management, bad results, and low employee productivity. So that's one problem of when there's bad communication, when employees aren't feeling supported, when they aren't feeling heard. Another statistic is that 79% of employers that were surveyed believe that they have a significant employee retention and engagement problem. 79% of companies surveyed means that they are investing lots and lots of money to recruit people, and then they can't hold on to them. And that is just, it's so detrimental when you lose people because it's just so disruptive. It's a morale killer, it's a productivity killer, it's a financial killer. It's so disruptive when you lose really, really good people. So we absolutely have a problem in today's workforce with transparency, productivity, communication, engagement, and all of this stems from a lack of an intentional culture that is truly, truly employee centric. It all gets back to culture.
It's interesting when you say, retention is a big issue. You think of companies that are so focused on customer acquisition that they don't think about customer retention. And
Hmm.
there's been a big shift recently into lifetime customer value and people really focusing on how to keep customers not just happy, or as Tony says, your raving fan customers,
Hmm.
they'll stick with you forever. Instead of leaving when the competition offers them something better. So it sounds like that's almost a principle that people need to look inward and take that principle and apply it to their internal teams as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you can get the inside of an organization right, then the rest of business for the organization will flow well. You have to get the inside right. You've got to get the right people, you've got to get the right processes. I know so many small businesses who from the outside, they invest in great online marketing, they've got a beautiful website, they've got lots of videos out there, but when you get get inside of them and you open up the hood, like if you're looking at a car and you open up the hood and you're expecting this beautiful glistening engine, and what you find is you have a mouse running on a wheel desperately trying to keep things running. When you don't have your processes really well defined and really well orchestrated in an organization, it just can wreak havoc. So your people and your processes, those are really your two main things that are going to keep your company running smoothly.
Well, you've seen under the hood of so many businesses by now.
Hmm.
I'd love to hear, I'd love to hear a horror story, but I'd love to hear also what an example of some businesses that you think are really doing things well, and maybe a story about something that you observed that you hadn't seen anywhere else but was really working for them.
Okay, I can share a good success story about a small business that I'm working with right now in the DC region, and I'm sure that she'll be very happy that I'm giving her a little plug on this show. So I have the pleasure of working with a realtor in the DC region. She's a high end realtor, but she has a brokerage. So I mean, she's not just a solopreneur; she's got a full team, and her name is Ati Williams, and she owns DC Home Buzz. And I've worked with Ati now. I mean, I've known her for many years, and I've been her dedicated business strategist and executive coach for at least 2 years now. And what has amazed me about Ati is that she is so process oriented and she is a marketing machine. And you've got this small company who just is so rigorous about their processes and the marketing that she cranks out from a strategic perspective. I am amazed, and that is why she is taking the entire DC residential market by storm. And she's been written up in the New York Times, and she's been written up in the Washington Post, and she's taking her brand national, and she's going to kill it because she's just, she's got the processes down, she's got the right people. She's listened to me. We've put in some really good hiring practices, and so she doesn't jump the gun. She doesn't hire from a place of desperation, she hires from a place of strategy. And so because she's got the hiring processes down, she's got the work processes down. What's really important about an organization is that they become what I call process centric instead of hero centric. When you've got an organization that is dependent on one or two heroes or a dozen heroes, if it's a larger organization, instead of it being process centric, first of all, it puts the executive team literally at the mercy of key people. They're being held hostage by key people. The second thing is that if something were to happen to these people and things aren't more process oriented, the customer experience could just be devastated, right? Another problem is obviously inefficiencies. If you don't have the right processes in place, you're constantly reinventing the wheel every single time you engage. And another problem with being hero centric versus process centric is that it is a morale killer. Because if you're not one of those heroes, if you're not one of those people on the pedestals, how are you going to feel? You're going to feel less than somebody else. And the truth is that everybody is needed in order to make an organization thrive. So my job and my goal with my clients is to go in and really diagnose where the processes break down. So making sure that not only do they have the right people, but do they have the right processes that are pushing the work through and really getting away from that hero mentality in the company.
Yeah, that's interesting because it's very much in line with something that Tony always says is that in a lot of spaces, particularly something like real estate, very focused on sales, you've got a very small percentage of your people, the peak performers, and they're
Hmm.
generating the vast majority of your revenue.
Right.
So the problem, and a lot of people focus on, okay, how are we going to weed out the low performers? That's the first question they ask. The second question they ask is, how are we going to retain our top performers? So how are we going to keep our heroes? But very few people focus on the people who are in the middle who could be peak performers, but they just don't have the tools or strategies available to them.
I saw the CEO of Capital One Bank speak, Rich Fairbank, and one of the things that resonated most when he spoke is that the threat of an organization is not the C player, well, the D player we're going to push out immediately, right? But it isn't the C player that's the threat of the organization, it's the B player. Because the B player is doing exactly what you've hired them to do, right? It's not that they're doing anything wrong. They're showing up, they're doing their job, they're performing that as the job description implies, okay? But the problem is they're not doing anything extra. And so when you have a B player in the organization, you don't really have a compelling reason to move them out, but they are taking up a space for where an A player can be. So that's something that really stuck with me with Rich Fairbank, that the greatest threat to an organization is not the C player, because you're going to move them out quickly. It's the B player that is delivering, but they're not going the extra mile. So, I thought I just wanted to mention that because, based on what you just said about, the people in the middle.
Sure. Have you
Yeah.
seen any processes put in place that, or any sort of internal strategies that help bring those B players to become A players?
I actually just wrote about, in my blog, I just wrote about the Peter Principle. So, are you familiar with the Peter Principle? So, the Peter Principle was introduced, I guess it had to be at least 40 years ago. And the Peter Principle is when an employee rises to their highest level of incompetence. Okay. So, it's a timeless principle, because what happens is, we bring this great talent into an organization, and they're loyal and they produce and they perform and they exceed our expectations. So what do? We promote them, right? And we keep promoting them and we keep promoting them and we keep promoting them. And what happens is we eventually promote them to a place in the organization that isn't at all aligned with who they are, what drives them, or what their skill set is. So one of those examples is, let's say you've got a stellar sales performer, right? They're out in the field, they are crushing it, they are blowing away their quota, they are making the company so much money. And so the executive team looks at them and they go, wow, he's a superstar. We need to promote him. Let's make him VP of sales. Let's bring him inside, and we'll have him be responsible for half a dozen other salespeople, and we'll keep him in this beautiful corner office because we're going to promote him because we think he's so worthwhile. Well, that is a recipe for disaster, okay? Because what happens is the person who's in the field, that's an extrovert, right? They're motivated by being connected to other people. They are not even driven by the money. They're just totally driven to be out there, right? And then what happens is you bring them inside the organization and you've taken them out of their element where they're successful, and they're miserable because their entire performance and compensation is then tied to the performance and compensation of other people. And they're stuck in a corner office and they can't ever leave the office. So that's just one example of what happens when someone is promoted to their highest level of incompetence. Another example of the Peter Principle is when the organization evolves beyond the employee themselves. So you put someone in a position, a company is just starting up, it's a startup company, and they say, I'm going to make you COO because you're my partner, you're my friend, and it's just the two of us, and you're going to be the COO. Well, it's really easy to be COO of a two-person company. It's super easy, right? I mean, you're basically putting the basic processes in place, right? You look down the line a year later, 2 years later, 3 years later, 5 years later, you've got 100, 200 employees. That person is not equipped to be COO. So you have just completely set them up for failure by putting them in a position that they do not have the skills or the capacity to grow into. So that's the example of the Peter Principle and what happens when you're not able to give them the tools or the resources, because not everything is coachable. Not everything is teachable. A lot of it has to do with what our own capacity limitations are. And when we're not tapped into that, we're going to set our employees up for failure.
Yeah, that's, identity and understanding what your true gifts are and how those play out into roles in the workplace. That's something that Tony's very passionate about. There are a few tests that, the people at his companies undergo and that he recommends to others. There's something called the caliper assessment. We do a disc profile. We recently came out with, it's a very, very short quiz called Artist, Manager, Entrepreneur. And the idea is that you fit into one of those three archetypes. And what you were saying about the salesperson who's out in the field, I mean, that's something you can't teach. They're extroverted, they want to be with people, they're very persuasive. In a way, they're an artist because they're creating and they're producing. You stick them
Or
in
they're
that,
an entrepreneur.
or they're an entrepreneur, right? Because
Right?
it's risk. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And you stick them in a corner office and call them a manager, and they're going to be miserable and they're going to underperform in that role. Are there any assessment tests that you recommend to small business owners, or any sort of ways that you can understand what somebody's true gift or true skill set really should be?
So we like the Colby. We've used the Colby in the past just to understand what drives people in terms of how they work with others. It's KOLBE, the Colby assessment. And then I personally like the VIA Strengths Finders. Now that's more of a character-based assessment, but I just like that one. Those are the main two. I mean, I'm familiar with DISC, and so if a company wants to use the DISC assessment, we can certainly use it. But typically, we've stuck to the Colby.
Great. So one last question for you. We're
Sure.
going into 2016, and everybody loves to talk about, actually, we're in 2016. Everybody loves to talk about what's next. And, you'll see articles in Fast Company about the latest trend in company culture. Is there anything that you think is not just a trend, but maybe part of a larger shift? For example, the no-hour work week, or there's a big thing now with unlimited maternity, paternity
hmm
leave. There's holacracy at Zappos. I mean, what things do you think will stick? What are not just passing fads like foosball tables?
Well, we're definitely moving to more of the contingent workforce. It just is what it is. And as a small business owner, especially with all the healthcare expenses, small businesses are not able to provide the healthcare that we would have wanted to provide. I mean, when I started Information Experts 20 years ago, we provided full healthcare for our employees and their families. Okay. And the healthcare costs now have just made it completely prohibitive. So as a result, people are now taking more ownership for their own healthcare. There's less loyalty to companies because of that benefit. It's not really a golden handcuff anymore. And the contingent workforce overall, meaning like the 1099 workers, the contractors, as well as part-time workers. I think a lot of companies are now moving to more part-time workers, where you might have two part-time workers that you don't provide insurance for, um, that will fill the same role as one full-time employee. So I think that that's definitely a trend, and companies need to understand that they're going to have to basically make sure that they have a very full bench of really, really qualified resources to get their work done at any time. I would say
So
this,
that's a challenge in and of itself, because you
it
were
is a
just talking about,
challenge.
1099 employees, they are not legally required to be in the office, right?
Mm-mm.
So you might have some virtual workers, and
Oh
two
yeah,
part-time people doing a full-time job lends itself to miscommunication and
that's right.
misunderstanding of who's doing what. Not to mention going back to this idea of a company as a whole, how do you engage with contractors? How do you bring them into the culture?
So that's a great question. And being that my first company is a government contracting firm, we've always had to deal with this challenge of having employees that are on site at our government agencies, and they're hardly part physically at all. They're like disconnected from the rest of our organization. Again, it gets back to the culture of communication. Communicate, communicate, communicate with every possible way that you can, creating environments and situations that bring together employees. At Information Experts, when I was CEO, we had what was known as a GTC, a Good Times Committee, and we actually had a line item in our budget for fun. Okay, so that was budgeted, and I had someone who was a dedicated GTC, Good Times Committee ambassador, and that was part of her job. I mean, she did other things, obviously, but that was part of her job to plan a whole calendar year of events to keep employees engaged. So I think keeping engagement at top of mind is going to be critical in the coming workforce, as people are part-time, contingent, they're working at multiple different jobs, they feel a part of many different organizations, and the leadership teams are just going to have to be okay with that. It is what it is. So that's definitely one of the trends. And then the other trend, which I mentioned just a few minutes ago, is definitely the evolved social enterprise. Really making sure that organizations integrate into their culture and into their business plans a piece of philanthropy, a piece of giving back, being part of the community. Not only is it just a good thing to do, we should all be taking care of each other, but it also will attract and recruit and help you recruit and retain the best talent moving forward, because this is what the millennial generation, that's what's important to them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Hmm.
Great. Okay, well, it's been a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, I appreciate it. And can
Yeah.
I please invite everybody who's listening to please join my leadership blog, join the conversation that I have every Friday on my blog at www.successfulculture.com. It's a leadership and organizational culture blog, and I write for the business owner. Everything I write comes from my 20 years of experience. It comes from my experience with my clients, and I write very actionable information because I really understand the challenges of ownership and entrepreneurship. And I am, my passion is to make sure that every entrepreneur and business owner can build the best business that they can possibly build and to reach their own personal and organizational potential. So I would invite you and encourage you to join in at successfulculture.com. Follow me on Twitter at Marissa11. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm everywhere, and I love to be connected.
Thanks so much, Marissa.
Thank you.
Do you have the right mindset and skills to take your business to the next level? Business Mastery is the only event in the world created by Tony Robbins to prepare you to master the mindset and skills you need in business to elevate your game. A one-of-a-kind, immersive program, Business Mastery will allow you to understand the critical factors impacting your business, then refocus and realign with the strategy and psychology you need to compete and innovate in any economy. Remember, business success is 80% psychology and 20% mechanics. If you're ready to learn and master the strategies to help you grow your business and stay competitive, then don't hesitate. Apply for the next Business Mastery program now. Learn more about the Business Mastery event at www.tonyrobbins.com. The Tony Robbins podcast is directed by Tony Robbins, hosted by Annie York, and produced by Carrie Song. Brooks Loro is our digital editor. Tyler Culbertson is our media coordinator. Special thanks to Diane Adcock for her creative review. Our website is tonyrobbins.com/podcast, where you can listen to all of our episodes, read articles, and learn more about upcoming events. Copyright Robbins Research International.